made a covenant with us in Horeb. Notice the words with us. He did not make a covenant with the world. He made a covenant with us in Mount Horeb. He made not the covenant with our fathers. Notice that. He did not make the covenant with our fathers, those before coming out of Egypt. He made the covenant with us. So, what a statement. He did not make the covenant with our fathers. Before they came out of Egypt, the covenant did not exist. And I read to you moments ago about what portion of that covenant had to do with the Sabbath day. But with us who are now present and living. Very plain, is it? Is it not? In the same chapter, verse number 13, it reiterates this, and I will try to read quickly in this. 6 days, verse number 13, thou shalt labor and do all thy work. But the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord thy God. In it thou shalt not do any work, thou, nor thy son, nor thy daughter, nor thy manservant, nor thy maidservant, nor thine ox, nor thine ass, nor any of thy cattle, nor any stranger that is within thy gates, that thy manservant and thy maidservant may rest as well as thou. And remember that you were a servant in the land of Egypt, and that the Lord thy God brought thee out, and thence through a mighty hand and by a stretched out arm. Therefore the Lord thy God commanded thee to keep the Sabbath day. You are to keep the Sabbath day because God delivered you from Egypt. He brought you out of Egypt, did he not say that? Through a mighty hand and by a stretched out arm. Therefore, he commanded you to keep the Sabbath day. There should be no doubt in our minds about this as to how the Jewish people have been delivered, and as a confirmation and a part of that covenant is they are to observe the Sabbath day because it is a memorial remembrance of how God delivered them out of the land of Egypt. Now, you that are not Jewish here today, you weren't brought out of Egypt. The covenant was not given to you, but it was given to them. We talk about Jesus, of course, a lot. And as he lived on this earth, God manifest in the flesh. He was the Messiah. And as you know, born into the Jewish community as a child, a boy, Virgin Mother Mary at the time. And so he was raised to keep the law and to observe the law. He was taught it, no doubt, as any other Jewish young man or girl would have been taught in that particular day. And so Jesus was aware of all of that, including everything that had to do with the Sabbath day. And so since he had been taught, and of course being God in flesh, he was the one who wrote through Moses the law. And so nothing of this was a shock or surprise, anything at all. But Jesus did pay attention to the Sabbath day as I give it to you from the book of Luke chapter 4 and verse number 16 concerning Jesus Christ. Because we have to look at this in a bit to see how did Jesus observe the Sabbath day? How was this done? And how important is it for us? Verse number 16, and he, that's Jesus, came to Nazareth where he had been brought up, and as his custom was, he went into the synagogue on the Sabbath day and stood up for to read. So this verse is telling us that Jesus went to the synagogue on the Sabbath day. And I think that we probably could recognize that he probably went to the synagogue or the temple every Sabbath day. I have no problem with that. I think it is significant in this verse to note when it says that he went to the synagogue as his custom was. As his custom was. An amazing, simple phrase. One in which, as he speaks about this, going to the synagogue, not being a duty, not being a commandment that he had to observe, but it was his way that he did things. It was his custom to go to the synagogue on the Sabbath day. Now, if he's God manifest in flesh, as we read in the scripture, I don't know whether he even had to go to the synagogue if you look at it in that sense, but it was his custom to do that. And so, as you look what Jesus did in regards to observation of the Sabbath, he did things a little different than the common Jewish person did. On the Sabbath day, he was known to heal people. And the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the scribes, they all watched him to see whether he would heal on the Sabbath day or not, because in their way of thinking and what the law had to say is that you did not any work on the Sabbath day. And so the man with the withered hand comes, and they're watching to see if he's going to heal, perform a miracle on the Sabbath day. And in their doctrine and their way of thinking, you don't do anything like that. And Jesus said, hey, which of you have an ox or an ass and gets in a ditch on the Sabbath day? You go help get him out. And that's just the way it is. And he said, what person among us that is withered like this hand and afflicted that should not be delivered on the Sabbath day, as well as your ox or your ass? So he makes this rather plain that doing good on the Sabbath day. He also went through the fields of corn, he and his disciples, and he plucked corn from the ears of the plant that was there and ate on the Sabbath day. And didn't they criticize him for that? And as they watched him and questioned him and pressured him about this. He answered some things concerning them and put them kind of with an understanding about this. Notice as I begin reading from Mark chapter 2 and verse 23. And it came to pass that he went through the cornfields on the Sabbath day, and his disciples began as they went to pluck the ears of corn. And the disciples said unto him, Behold, why do they on the Sabbath day that which is not lawful? And he said unto them, Have ye not read what David did when he had need and was hungered, he and they that were with him, how he went into the house of God on the day Abiathar the high priest, and did eat the showbread, which was not lawful to eat, but for the priest, and gave also to them which were with him. And he said unto them, and this is an important principle, the Sabbath was made for man, and not man for the Sabbath. Therefore the Son of Man is Lord also of the Sabbath. Plain statement, and we need to understand the Sabbath may have been very important in that particular time, but Jesus is making the point that the Sabbath should not control you. It is made for you, and you were not made to serve the Sabbath. How important is it to you? If it's so much that it is a deal breaker for you, then probably you put too much emphasis on the Sabbath day. The Sabbath was made to be a rest to you, a time of rest for you. Oftentimes people say, well, on the Saturday is the day to worship. Well, I know that worship should happen realistically 7 days a week. Not just on one day a week, and I think you'd all concur with that. Nowhere does it say that you just to worship on Saturday. You can worship every day of the week. And so is it okay if I worship on Sunday? Is it okay if I worship on Monday? Is it okay if I worship on Tuesday? Is it okay if I have midweek service on Wednesday or Thursday and Friday? Certainly it is. And I have no problem with someone who worships only on Saturday or say they only worship on Saturday. But I have an issue when you tell me I can't worship on Sunday. The Sabbath was made for man and not man for the Sabbath. The Sabbath day was to be a day of rest. It is not specified to be a day of worship. It is to be a day of rest. But today, on the Sabbath day, people get up and they get dressed and they hurry about and take care of their business, and they drive for miles to go to church, and they go through all the process of having church and drive home and have family gatherings and so forth and so on. And it is not a day of rest. If you want to observe the Sabbath in its truest sense, stay at home and rest. Amen. That's the true meaning and spirit of the Sabbath day. I've had people, strong adherents into the Sabbath day or the seventh day, and they speak about the Sabbath day is observed from the day of creation. Go with me to the book of Genesis chapter 2 and see what it says in the beginning about this, because in their way of thinking that the Sabbath day did not begin in Exodus chapter 16, but it began in the creation in Genesis chapter number 1 and chapter 2. But when you get to Genesis chapter 2 and verse number 2, it says this about this day. On the seventh day, God ended his work which he had made, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had made.